I was 37, sitting on a cold bench off Fifth Avenue, just across from the hematology tower, telling myself I was only resting. I wasn't. I was watching that hospital entrance like something might walk out and change everything. Central Park in late October had that washed-out light that makes everything look thinner than it is. Sky, trees, people. The wind kept kicking leaves into my shoes, and I didn't bother brushing them off. Kids zipped past me on scooters, laughing, yelling, spinning out. I heard my grandma Cora's voice in my head, clear as ever, counting pigeons. 24, 25, start again if you lose track. We used to sit near the old library and do just that, count birds. She'd wear her corduroy coat and hum under her breath. Cora raised me more than my mom ever did. She was a college math professor who ran life like an equation. No shortcuts, no lies, everything balanced. She used to say, life's like compound interest. Bad habits, good choices, it all adds up. Quick note before we jump in, drop a comment with the city or country you're listening from. It helps us see where everyone's tuning in and plan the best time for new stories. Thanks for watching Revenge by Frank. All right, let's get started. My name's Brandon Taylor. I'm a risk analyst. I calculate exposure and model uncertainty for a living, and I was really very good at it, because I grew up inside it. I never knew my dad. Every time I asked, Cora said the same thing. It's not my secret to tell. So I shelved it. Like a cold file I didn't expect to reopen. Then came Daniela. She was 2 years younger, sharp-eyed, focused like a lens. She worked as a documentary reporter, the kind that chased stories nobody wanted to tell. Kenya, Mali, Sudan. She'd come back dusty, sunburned, carrying cameras and 100 moments in her eyes. I remember the first time Sophie held a crayon. She was still in diapers, but her grip was like a hawk's. She drew wild comets across my tie. That was Daniela's daughter through and through. Quiet, curious, watching everything. Daniela didn't like loud people. She loved quiet museums, underdog scientists, and kids who asked questions teachers couldn't answer. She once told me, "If they stop asking questions, Brandon, we're all screwed." Then one trip went bad. Real bad. Her editor first said they lost comms, then said, missing. 11 weeks later, they mailed me her bag. Camera cracked, scarf folded. No Daniela. I tried to keep it together. Daycare, bedtime drawings, midnight fevers. But I'd sit in that kitchen at 2 a.m. with the baby monitor lit up, holding a mug of cold tea, waiting for a sound that never came. That spring, Alice Wilson walked back into my life. I hadn't seen her since high school in Ohio. Still smiled like the world bent around her. Still made you feel like nothing bad could happen while she was in the room. Sophie was 3 then. That year cracked something wide open. She started talking in full paragraphs. She narrated everything like it was a story she was writing herself. She'd say, "Daddy, today was blue and a little sharp," or "This sandwich is like Wednesday." I smiled, I laughed, but deep down I was standing in a hole that had no bottom, and I didn't know yet just how much farther I had left to fall. Alice moved through a room like she'd already been applauded. Still had that way of looking at you that made you think she was deciding if you were worth the trouble. 1 year younger than me, same school in Ohio, but back then she went for the senior with the German car, while I was still babysitting Cora's retirement calculator and trying to figure out compounding dividends. When we reconnected, she said, "I always wondered what would have happened if we gave it a shot back then." But that was a revision. The truth? She didn't give me a second look in high school, and I didn't blame her. I was skinny, quiet, all sharp elbows and spreadsheets. But grief screws with your judgment. So does loneliness. And when someone that radiant shows up smiling like a rescue boat, you don't ask about leaks. You just climb in. 7 months later, we were married in a private room at the Mandarin. Nothing big, just signed papers, some champagne, and a pair of confused waitstaff. I told myself Sophie needed a mother figure. Alice told me she'd learn to love the quiet life. Neither of us was telling the truth. At that point, I was still pulling bonuses with extra zeros, managing a high-exposure portfolio like a blackjack table where I counted cards. Amex points poured in like faucet water. Alice moved into my apartment on the Upper West Side and started booking spa days with a tone like she was doing me a favor. She liked Sophie in the abstract, like someone might like a well-trained dog. She'd ruffle her hair, call her sweetie, then turn right back to talking about some gallery opening in Tribeca or a friend's rooftop dinner where everyone had to wear white. Sophie just looked at her like she was a screen playing a commercial she didn't understand. I tried to ignore the distance, tried harder to close it. One Saturday I left work early, made roast chicken, set the table with cloth napkins. Alice came in at 10 p.m., smelling like smoked gin and someone else's cologne, dropped her heels by the door and said, "Did I miss something?" At work, the slide started. Scott Davis, regional manager and part-time tyrant, pushed through a reorg. I lost my lead book and 23% of my compensation in 1 quarter. It wasn't a demotion, but it was the kind of shift that makes you recheck your resume at midnight. Alice called it vibes. That was her word. "The energy's off, babe. You're staying safe on the edges." She started going out more. Art friends, gallery people, names that never had last names, never appeared twice. I asked once if she was seeing someone, and she laughed like I'd told a bad joke. "You're spiraling," she said, holding a green juice and scrolling Instagram. "Maybe you need a reset." I kept the peace. "For Sophie," I said, "for stability." Clayton Miller, my buddy at the firm, pulled me aside one morning with coffee and said, "Man, you're being managed at home like a policy with exclusions." I laughed because it was easier than agreeing. When Sophie turned 5, she made a birthday card for Alice with a stick figure wearing what she called fancy lady shoes. Alice left it unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days before throwing it out with takeout boxes. I dug it out and tucked it into a drawer. Then, one Monday morning, I opened my dresser to find her gold bracelet gone and a manila envelope propped against the mirror. Her note was on hotel stationery. I still remember the opening line. "Brandon, I don't want to lie to you or to myself anymore." She said she'd met Sheikh Omar Al-Khatib through friends, was flying to Abu Dhabi, and that I'd be happier without the drama. No, I'll call Sophie. No, I love you. Not even a backward glance. Just a signature that looked bored and a list of her flight times. It was like watching someone erase herself from a chalkboard. I didn't yell. I didn't call. I sat on the edge of the bed, read it 3 times, then pulled my laptop over and started gathering documentation. 6 months of texts, flight confirmations, screenshots of her social posts. I filed for divorce in Manhattan under no fault, irretrievable breakdown, and attached everything. She never responded. The court granted it by default. I got sole custody of Sophie, no spousal support. Judge didn't even blink. It was over in under 15 minutes. I walked out feeling like I'd been underwater for a year, and finally came up gasping. I picked Sophie up from preschool that day. She climbed into the car with glitter in her hair and asked if we could get pancakes for dinner. I said, "Sure. You want whipped cream?" She said, "Is it a celebration?" And I said, "Yeah, baby. It kind of is." The first time Sophie fainted, we were on the sidewalk outside the park. Pigeons everywhere. She had a sketchbook in one hand and a crayon in the other. Her knees buckled mid-sentence, and she dropped like a puppet with the strings cut. I caught her head before it hit concrete, but I swear I stopped breathing for a full minute. In the ER, I kept my voice calm for her sake, while I shook inside like I was in an earthquake drill. Nurses came in with clipped voices and steady hands. They took blood, did scans, then parked us in a cold room with chairs made of plastic that felt like punishment. A resident walked in reading from a chart like he didn't want to own the words. "It's hereditary hemolytic anemia, not curable, but manageable," he said, glancing at the door like someone might pull him out of the room before questions started. I asked how manageable looked. He said it meant monitoring, transfusions, labs, sometimes meds. Then he handed me a flyer like I was shopping for a gym. I folded it without looking and asked for names. That night, I put Sophie to bed with a heating pad and a stuffed dog she called Blueberry. She asked if she did something wrong. I told her no. Her body just needed more help than most, and that we'd find the right people. I started calling the next morning. I made 42 calls in 4 days, got 9 callbacks. Every one of them said the same thing. The third quarter next year. Not taking new patients. Not pediatric. Or my favorite. Your insurance is not accepted at this time. It felt like trying to get into an Ivy League school with a napkin and a pencil. Everyone I talked to said the same name. Dr. Catherine Cooper. They said she was the one. Brilliant. Blunt. A hammer when you needed one. Ran the pediatric hematology department at Mercy General. But her office line was a disaster. You couldn't get through. I tried the online portal and got locked out twice. I refreshed the wait list so many times it became muscle memory. I stopped sleeping. I started pacing. I rented a tiny month-to-month unit 3 blocks from the hospital, cheaper than commuting from uptown, and took unpaid leave. When Scott called and said, "Brandon, this is career-limiting behavior," I muted him and shut my laptop without a word. Every night after I tucked Sophie in, I sat on that same bench near the side entrance of Mercy General. It gave me a full view of the staff parking lot and the side doors where the real traffic happened. Badges, scrubs, delivery runs. I tracked them all like I was building a case file. I had one hand on the minivan door the night I almost snapped. I told myself I'd fake a medical emergency in the lobby, ask for a consult, force a moment. It was a garbage plan and I knew it, but desperation scrambles your judgment. You stop caring how dumb something sounds when you've got a sick kid in the next room and a wall of voicemails telling you to wait a year. Then came Eddie Ross. He slid onto the bench next to me like he'd done it 100 times. 7 years old, scuffed sneakers, gray hoodie 2 sizes too big. He looked at me sideways and said, "You look like someone stole your lunch money." I blinked at him. "What?" "You've got the face. Like when Mr. Thomas forgets snack day and all we get is pretzels." He fed pigeons 1 crumb at a time like he had a quota. I asked what he was doing out here alone. He said he lived at the group home on 97th, came to the park because pigeons don't interrupt. "Name's Eddie," he added, brushing a leaf off the bench like he paid rent there. I told him my name, then asked why he was talking to me. "You're tracking people. I seen your notebook," he said, nodding toward my lap. "You write badge colors and times. You're not subtle." I laughed in spite of myself. "I'm trying to find someone." "Is it the lady in the red scarf who runs fast and yells about carbs?" he asked, totally serious. I sat up straight. "What?" "She comes early, brings bagels sometimes. Gave me gloves when my fingers cracked. She's a doctor. People say she's smart but grumpy." That's when I knew. He meant Catherine. My heart kicked once, hard enough to make my chest burn. "You talked to her?" I asked. "Yeah. She said I have good observational retention," Eddie replied, dragging out the syllables like a word puzzle he solved. I said thanks. She laughed. He looked at me again, longer this time, like he was weighing something. Then he said, "You look like a good dad trying a bad idea." I didn't answer. Couldn't. I just stared at him like a fool, every plan I had suddenly falling apart because a kid with beat-up shoes just told me more truth than any adult had in weeks. The next morning, Eddie was standing outside the apartment building like he belonged there. Hoodie zipped up, backpack over one shoulder, dead serious. "Got permission," he said before I could ask. "Her name's Lucy Turner, social worker. She said if she stays the whole time, I can visit." Lucy wasn't far behind. Early 30s, sharp eyes, hair in a no-nonsense ponytail. She gave me a tight smile and held up a clipboard. "I already ran your name through the database," she said. "You're clean. He's approved for a day visit under my supervision. Don't make me regret it." I nodded and held the door open. "We're making grilled cheese." Sophie was on the rug in the living room drawing circles with a red crayon when we walked in. She looked up and blinked once, then again. Eddie stood there like it was a job interview. She asked, "Who's that?" "He's my friend," I said. "He likes pigeons and says funny things." Eddie gave her a short bow, like he'd seen in a cartoon. "Professor Pigeons, at your service." Sophie laughed, one of those little hiccup laughs I hadn't heard in months, and called him that all morning. "Professor, what do pigeons eat?" "Professor, do they get cold?" He told her she had artist hands, and I swear her back straightened like someone pulled a string. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Lucy sat at the kitchen island drinking coffee like she'd seen 1,000 families try to act normal and didn't buy the performance for a second. But even she cracked a smile when Eddie and Sophie started playing Guess That Crayon and ended up covered in blue marker. While Sophie showed Eddie how to fold paper boats, he leaned over and said, "That doctor I told you about, the one who runs and brings bagels, I can bring her." I blinked. "You know where she lives?" "No, but she loops the park same time every morning." I wait. She shows up. Boom. Science lady appears. "I thought she was a nurse." "Nope," he said. "Real doctor. Jacket says, Chief something something. You'll see." 2 days later, there was a knock on the door. Eddie was on the other side, smug as ever. Next to him stood Dr. Catherine Cooper, running jacket zipped halfway, hospital ID clipped to the hem, hair pulled back in a ponytail that didn't try to be perfect. She stuck out her hand like this was a business meeting. "Catherine Cooper, Eddie tells me you've been on a personal stakeout." I just stared. "I didn't think you'd come." "I told him I would," she said. "He's more reliable than your patient portal." They stepped inside. Sophie peeked around the corner, saw the badge, and froze like she expected needles. Catherine crouched down and held up her hands like she was about to catch a butterfly. "Hi, Sophie. I'm just here to ask a few questions. You get to be the boss." Sophie looked at me. I nodded. She stepped closer, crayon still in one hand. Catherine didn't pull out a chart. She didn't talk over anyone. She sat cross-legged on the floor, picked up a blue crayon, and asked, "Do you like drawing or does it help you think?" Sophie answered softly. Then they were off, talking about shapes, energy, why her bones felt tired sometimes. Catherine asked medical questions buried in kid language. "Do you ever feel floaty? Does your heart race when you color fast?" I stood in the kitchen pretending to drink coffee, watching them laugh. It was the first time since the diagnosis I didn't feel like I was waiting for something terrible to drop. When Sophie stepped away to show Eddie her room, I followed Catherine into the hallway. I tried the portal. I called. I begged, I said. I didn't know how to get through. She rolled her eyes like she'd been through it 100 times. "That portal's a dinosaur. I've complained, they say they're fixing it. Meanwhile, kids wait. It's garbage." Then she pulled out her phone, texted someone, and said, "You've got an appointment this Friday at 10. Bring her fasting. I'll be ready." I nearly lost it, could barely swallow. I reached for the wall like the air got heavy. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." In 12 days, Catherine built a protocol from scratch. Sophie got a schedule, folate supplements, transfusions every few weeks, iron levels tracked weekly. There was a specific medication, pricey, not covered, but Catherine got it comped through a hospital fund. I asked how. She said, "You don't ask. You just make the right noise until they want you to shut up." She didn't stop there. She pushed the hospital board to approve a new intake page for pediatric chronic cases, something with real callback times, scholarship forms, fewer needless hurdles. Said she was tired of sick kids disappearing into voicemail limbo. I asked her why she cared so much. She shrugged. I was the sick kid. I remember how it feels to be told to wait when waiting isn't an option. One night after Sophie's labs came back stable, I caught her humming while she updated Sophie's chart. Eddie was asleep on the couch with a comic book on his face. Sophie was in her room coloring a picture of a doctor with a red scarf. Catherine looked up and said, "You can exhale now, Brandon. We've got her." I did. Right there, leaning against the counter, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like a year. The next morning, I walked into the office just long enough to get told I wasn't doing enough. Scott called me into his glass box at exactly 7:40 a.m., like he'd been waiting all night for me to show. He didn't look up. "Your responsiveness is down, Brandon. Clients are noticing." I dropped my bag in the chair. "I'm still hitting deliverables. My models are clean. Just not answering emails at 10 p.m. anymore." He set down his tablet like he wanted drama. "We all sacrifice." I looked him in the eye and said, "I already did." Then I walked out before I said something that'd blow up the only paycheck keeping the lights on. Clayton caught me near the elevators. He handed me coffee and said, "You looked like you were about to take a hostage in there. Need to balance the energy." I cracked a smile. "That obvious?" "Only to people who've been there. Listen, client of mine needs some risk modeling for a supply chain angle. Clean job, decent pay, not on our books. You interested?" I didn't even blink. "Send me the brief." Evenings were full. Lab draws, second-grade math, snack debates. Sophie was sketching nonstop, women running, birds flying, boys in hoodies tossing crumbs. She gave Catherine a drawing of a red scarf with the caption, "Hero Brain Lady." Catherine laughed so hard she nearly snorted tea. That week, Lucy called, said Eddie's group home lost a major donor. They might move the kids to a facility in Queens with higher ratios and less stable staff. Translation: more kids, less care, worse everything. Catherine sat me down that night with paperwork spread across the table like a dinner service. "There's an option," she said, "but it's a big ask. You could become a certified foster resource. Start as weekend respite. If it works, we go from there." I cut her off gently. "Yes. Whatever it takes." She raised her eyebrows. "You should read the forms first." I waved her off. Cora used to say, "If you can carry more, carry more. It's math. Sum of goods beats sum of fears." I treated the whole thing like a reinsurance submission. Built Eddie's case packet from the ground up. School notes, meal preferences, photos, references, affidavits. Clayton took one look and said, "Brandon, this isn't fostering. This is dad compliance." I didn't care. I wasn't losing that kid to a system that didn't know his name. One night I was up late reviewing state forms when a notification popped up. Alice, posting from Dubai. She was holding a falcon on her arm with a caption about choosing happiness. The bracelet I bought her on our first anniversary was still on her wrist. I didn't comment, didn't message, just blocked her. Then I sat back and realized how light my chest felt. Meanwhile, Catherine's plan worked. Sophie's numbers started trending up after 28 days. She climbed stairs without resting, ate a full sandwich without needing a nap, smiled, really smiled, without faking it for my sake. I tracked her metrics like earnings reports. Her hematocrit held steady. Heart rate normalized. She even made it through a whole art class without zoning out. The night her fever spiked to 101.3, I didn't panic. I laid a blanket on the rug outside her room, head against the door frame. I listened to her breathing, counting each inhale like an actuarial table. At 3 a.m., she woke up and whispered through the crack, "Daddy, I can do the hard parts if you keep the pencils sharp." That sentence leveled me. I pressed my palm to the door. "Deal, baby. You've got it." The next day, Lucy called back. The Queen's move was still on the table, but our paperwork was solid, faster than most. She said if I could push through the training course, get the home study started, Eddie might not have to move at all. Catherine offered to pay for groceries and the legal mess if it helped keep Eddie stable. I told her I could handle it, but she said, "I've got budget. Let me use it for something that matters." We kept moving. Nights were split between Sophie's drawings and foster licensing modules. I fell asleep more than once with a laptop on my chest and state guidelines blurring in my head. One evening, Eddie asked if he could bring his toothbrush next time. Said it was easier than packing. I looked at Lucy. She nodded. "Yeah," I told him. "Top drawer. Purple cup's yours. He grinned like he'd just been handed the keys to a spaceship. Sophie made him a welcome sign for the door. It had pigeons in suits and a cartoon version of Blueberry, the stuffed dog. At work, Scott tried pulling me back in again. Asked why I wasn't gunning for the next title, why I'd stopped staying late, why I'd turned down a conference panel. "You used to care," he said. I looked him dead in the face. "I still care, just not about your ladder." I left that meeting with another side contract from Clayton, and enough confidence to know I'd be just fine without the old grind. I wasn't climbing anymore. I was building something that didn't need a corner office to feel real. It started with a red label on a pharmacy bag and a shrug from a tech who couldn't pronounce Sophie's medication. The refill was denied. Insurance snafu. 2 days later, Catherine emailed me the news that a donor who'd been backing a key part of Sophie's med protocol had pulled their funding. That meant one of her meds, retail price north of $2,000, was no longer covered under the hospital's comped inventory. I ran hot for 2 straight days. Emails, calls, left a voicemail for someone in procurement that probably got flagged. Then I remembered a board member I'd met at a client dinner last year. White hair, crisp shirt, liked my insight on commodity tail risk. I still had his card. Around 2:11 a.m., I sat down with my laptop and drafted a note that walked the line between pressure and threat. I didn't use the word liability, but I made absolutely sure it was implied. By the 3rd paragraph, I'd worked myself into a tone that felt like a lawsuit wearing a tie. I stared at that blinking cursor like it was counting down. Then Eddie padded out from his room in socks and a hoodie, rubbing one eye, holding his water bottle like a flashlight. "Why are you typing angry?" he asked. I didn't answer at first, just minimized the screen and sighed. He walked closer and said, "If you scare them, they'll be scared of us." I looked at him. 7 years old, honest as a mirror. I felt like a kid again myself, like I'd just gotten caught holding a rock too close to a neighbor's window. I deleted the draft. The next morning I told Catherine the truth while we sat outside the infusion room. She didn't scold, just nodded and said, "We win with patience and paperwork," then handed me a short list of pro bono funding pools that only insiders ever saw. 3 of them weren't even public-facing. That afternoon, Lucy called. The Queen's move was accelerating. We had 19 days to stand up a full foster placement if we wanted to block Eddie from getting transferred. I shut my laptop, rolled up my sleeves, and buried myself in paperwork. I wasn't losing that kid to some place where the staff forgot birthdays and never learned names. Clayton wrote 2 letters of reference. One made me sound like I was already halfway to sainthood. The other, he admitted, was written under the influence of exactly 3 beers and a crying baby at his house. Both were gold. I asked Cora's old neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, to notarize everything. She didn't blink, just stamped each form and said, "You still walk like a man who counts steps." Then she sent me home with banana bread and a hug I didn't expect. Catherine called in a favor to a pediatric psychiatrist she trusted. The doctor interviewed Eddie and Sophie together for 15 minutes, then wrote a line in the official affidavit that carried decisive weight. The bond between these 2 children is primary and protective in nature. Separation would constitute psychological harm. That line, according to Lucy, could be the difference between a weekend placement and full certification. Then Scott tried me again. He forwarded me a calendar block with the subject line, "Realignment Discussion." I walked in, and he was already halfway through a speech about bandwidth and firm loyalty. Said my hours were drifting, and it was not setting a scalable example. I let him finish. Then I slid a new model across his desk. It was tight, clean math, airtight assumptions, saved the firm over 6 figures in reserve adjustments on a disputed policy. He flipped through it, nodding like he didn't want to like it but couldn't ignore the numbers. I waited until he was quiet, then said, "Put my flex time in writing or I shop this work elsewhere." He signed the agreement the next day. It wasn't a victory, but it was a clear boundary. I didn't need power. I just needed space to protect what mattered. Sophie, meanwhile, started her own rebellion. She'd been watching Catherine teach me to set boundaries. So she launched a small art class in our living room. 2 kids from the building, $5 supplies, and a shoebox she labeled donations in crooked marker. She forgot to collect anything the first week. Just handed out pencils and said, "You can draw whatever makes you brave." The other kids nodded like it made perfect sense. Eddie took attendance with a clipboard and made up fake names for each kid. One boy became Captain Crumb. The other? Speedy Giraffe. Sophie was Professor Color, and Eddie, of course, was still Professor Pigeons. I sat in the hallway outside the room with my laptop, reviewing Eddie's case files and printing another set of forms for Lucy. Catherine leaned against the opposite wall, sipping tea, reading Sophie's newest sketch. "She drew me with a cape," she said. I looked over. The drawing showed Catherine with a clipboard in one hand, a red scarf around her neck, and fire coming out of her shoes. Eddie was flying beside her. Sophie was on the ground, waving. "You look taller in this one," I said. "She's generous," Catherine replied, tucking the paper into her bag. I smiled and turned back to the laptop. 2 more forms to go, a background check to upload, and a school letter to finalize. We were close. I was making coffee at 5:28 in the morning when the email came through. Subject line: Uncovered file, Daniela Taylor, March archive. It was from a producer on her old team, someone I didn't recognize. They were shutting down a media server, and in the mess of old backup data, someone found a scheduled video Daniela had left behind. Time-stamped 11 days before she vanished. The file was only 8 minutes long. I clicked it without thinking. She was in a white shirt, dusty around the collar, sitting in front of a sun-faded canvas tent. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, no script, just her voice. "If you're seeing this," she said, "then something went wrong." I froze, mug still in my hand, the smell of burnt coffee curling around me like smoke. She talked about mineral rights and child labor in Western Mali, mines no one wanted filmed, kids too young to lie well. She said someone had followed her last time, that she was going again, just once more, to get the proof she needed. Then she said, "If I don't come home, find people who fight for children. That's the only thing that doesn't feel like a lie." I sat down on the floor and didn't move. Didn't even cry right away. Just watched the screen freeze on her face like it was still buffering. Then the tears came, hard and stupid. I let them. After it passed, I got up, wiped my eyes on the sleeve of an old hoodie, and packed Sophie's lunch: turkey sandwich, grapes, a juice box. Like it was any other Tuesday. Catherine came by later that morning. She found me sitting on the stoop with the video still open on my phone, screen dark, battery at 4%. "You okay?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I handed her the phone instead. She watched half of it. Didn't say a word. Just put her hand on my shoulder and left it there until the silence felt steady again. Later that day, Eddie asked if Daniela was brave. "Yeah," I told him. "She was." He nodded like I'd confirmed a math problem and said, "Then we have to be brave too." Like it was the fine print on a cereal box. That night I printed her words and stuck them in my wallet, behind my insurance card. It felt like carrying a mission. The next day, I opened my inbox to a new message from Alice's lawyer in Dubai. Subject line: Reputational inquiry, visitation proposal. She'd apparently found a new kind of visibility and wanted a reputationally sensitive visitation plan to soften her public image. I laughed so loud in the hallway Sophie came out and asked if cartoons had started early. We didn't ignore it. We filed to modify the original custody agreement. I worked with my attorney to draft a no visitation clause unless Alice completed a full therapy program and passed a forensic evaluation proving she wouldn't destabilize Sophie. No room for guessing. No door left half open. Lucy agreed to testify. She reminded me of the time Alice showed up at our building 3 months back, clearly drunk, asking if Sophie could make a cute little video for some charity gala she was throwing in Dubai. She called it good optics for the Western donors, Lucy said. Didn't even ask how Sophie was doing. Just said she looked healthy and that was enough. Catherine wasn't subtle either. She pulled up Sophie's lab records from the week Alice sent her last barrage of texts. Long, chaotic messages asking to talk, then blaming me, then claiming spiritual awakening. The stress spike in Sophie's numbers was clean, right there in the chart. Hemoglobin down, heart rate up. Not dramatic, Catherine told the attorney. Just undeniable. Eddie watched me print court documents one night and asked what they were for. It's so Sophie doesn't get scared again, I told him. Is it about the lady with the bracelets? Yeah, that lady. He looked serious. You should make her take a drawing class. She doesn't get feelings. Catherine heard that from the next room and laughed so hard she dropped her tea. That weekend, I found Sophie taping a note inside her bedroom door. It read, "This is a peace zone. No stress, no yelling, only naps and pictures." I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I made a second copy and stuck it on the fridge. One night I opened the wallet and read Daniela's words again. Find people who fight for children. It made me pause in the middle of a grocery list and close my laptop. Because that was it. That was the map. I wasn't here to look strong or be perfect. I was here to fight for them. In paperwork, in courtrooms, in phone calls and meal plans and art class sign-up sheets. Every errand started to feel like it mattered again. Because it wasn't just survival anymore. It was proof. 18 months had passed since Alice took off with a hotel envelope and a new last name. By the time we landed back in court, the case file was heavier with dust than new material. But we showed up ready. Family court on a humid Tuesday in Manhattan smells like burnt coffee, stressed out paperwork, and floor cleaner that gave up trying to win. We waited 2 hours for a 5-minute hearing. The benches were narrow, the air stale, and Sophie had colored half a notebook by the time they called our name. Alice walked in late, of course, wearing a pale beige dress that looked more boardroom than courtroom. She had a handler, some PR-looking guy with teeth too white for real life, and she called me Bren, like we were catching up over brunch. I didn't respond. My lawyer slid her the printed copy of her own abandonment note, the one written on hotel stationery from Dubai, and screenshots of her messages after Sophie got sick. One said, "Pretend we never met. It's easier." Lucy testified like a steel beam, calm, straight, unshakable. She laid out Alice's brief, sloppy attempt at contact and her request to use Sophie in a public-facing project that had nothing to do with parenting. Then Catherine took the stand. She kept her tone clinical but steady, confirming that Sophie's health had stabilized only after prolonged distance from her stepmother. I kept it simple. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I said, "Sophie is safe, healthy, and doesn't need press." Alice's lawyer, young, shiny, overcoached, stood up and said they were requesting joint decision-making rights. Not time, not contact, just rights for optics. The judge looked over the top of her glasses and asked, "Do optics attend transfusions? Do they pay for prescriptions? Do they cancel vacation when hemoglobin crashes?" Then she looked at me. "Mr. Taylor, any financial concern tied to Ms. Wilson's departure?" My lawyer slid over a spreadsheet with timestamps, transactions, and the balance of our joint savings account the week before Alice left. The judge read it, squinted, and signed the line for reimbursement. $18,450. Not a life changer, but not pocket lint either. Alice's handler flinched like someone hit him with an overdue tax bill. She didn't look at me. Outside the courtroom, I handed my lawyer one more envelope and said, "Send it to her PR team." It was the full ruling, along with her original goodbye note. No threats, no summary, just the documents. They'd recently emailed asking if Sophie could be featured in a resilience-themed human interest piece. I figured they'd want all the facts. Clayton called it petty. I called it record-keeping. Either way, it was a quiet but final end. Sophie was waiting outside with Eddie, a book under one arm and 2 bottles of juice under the other. She looked up at me and asked, "Is that lady going to bother us again?" "Not if I can help it," I told her, and I meant it. Eddie declared we needed ice cream, non-negotiable. "This is what winning boring looks like," he said, digging into a waffle cone with rainbow sprinkles. We sat on the curb with the city buzzing around us like we weren't even part of it. Catherine joined us halfway through her shift, still in scrubs, hair tied back. Sophie handed her the last bite of her cone without a word. Just passed it to her like an offering. Catherine looked at me and said, "I take it we're done with that chapter?" "Yeah," I said. "Finally." Sophie pulled a crayon from her pocket and started sketching a little box with a big X through it. "What's that?" I asked. "A box of stress," she said. "I'm throwing it out." By the end of that summer, Eddie's placement was official. Started as respite, just weekends. Then it turned into something more without anyone having to say it. Our fridge looked like a middle school locker. Drawings, magnets, calendar reminders. A crooked note from Sophie that read, "No sadness past this shelf." Catherine and I slipped into a rhythm so fast it felt like we'd been doing it for years. Morning park loops at 6:15 sharp. Clinic updates over leftovers at lunch. Homework triage at night. I cooked more, mostly out of necessity, and she never let me forget the way I measured salt like it was radioactive. "You know you can just shake the box, right?" she'd say, grinning while she stirred soup. "I like consistency," I'd answer every time, just to watch her roll her eyes. Sophie's labs leveled out. No more red flags, no more late-night spikes. She started 4th grade on time with a laminated note in her backpack, listing her meds and a fresh set of colored pencils packed so tight she needed 2 rubber bands to hold them. She taped a photo of Blueberry to the inside flap and told me it was her emotional backup unit. Eddie started walking her to school when Catherine had early rounds. They didn't hold hands, but they didn't need to. They moved like satellites, same orbit, different stride. I kept thinking about cutting ties with the firm completely. I'm not a startup guy, but I built a small LLC out of an old tax folder and a free logo builder. 3 clients, steady income. None of them cared what hours I worked as long as the models were right. I worked from the kitchen, from the clinic lobby, from the car outside Sophie's art class. No suits, no sales calls, no pretenses. Scott tried one more move. Classic power play. Called me, said, "Let's realign before the 4th quarter," like nothing had happened. I stopped him mid-pitch. I forwarded him my terms. No weekends, no 9 p.m., no surprise travel. He offered contract work at a higher rate just to save face. I took it on my conditions. It felt like growing a spine I didn't remember ordering. Meanwhile, Lucy gave us the reality check on adoption. Classes, interviews, court delays. "It'll be a process," she warned. We didn't flinch. Cora's old quilt went straight onto Eddie's bed the day the paperwork hit the mailbox. It looked like it had always been there. One night I almost slipped. One of my old clients sat on the board of a foundation tied to foster care grants. I started drafting a nudge email to push Eddie's case forward. Then Sophie walked by, saw my screen, and said, "Daddy, people always like you better when you wait your turn." She didn't mean it to land like a sermon, but it stopped me cold. I closed the tab and walked away from the desk. So we waited. We also moved. Catherine pushed the hospital to fund 2 new patient navigator roles. That broken intake page, it became a full internal portal with live callbacks, scholarship tracking, and a dedicated form just for chronic kids under 10. She even named it after the first nurse who ever helped her through a flare-up as a kid. Eddie started using the words, "our family," like they'd always been his. Nobody corrected him. I didn't need to. It was already true. Sophie taught him how to make grilled cheese without burning it. He taught her how to play chess with jelly beans. They shared markers and secrets, and the last banana without ever being asked. Sometimes I'd hear them arguing in the hall, and then bursting into laughter 2 seconds later like no one remembered what the fight was about. At night, after the dishes were done and backpacks were packed, I'd sit on the couch and watch Daniela's video again. Not always the full thing. Sometimes just the first half, just enough to hear her say the words. "If I don't come home, find people who fight for children." Some nights I turned it off early and didn't feel guilty, because maybe the fight was still happening. Maybe we were already in it. It was April again, and I was back on the same bench off Fifth, just across from the hematology tower. The trees looked greener than I remembered. Maybe they always did, and I was just too burned out to see it back then. I didn't check the hospital doors anymore. Didn't need to. Sophie's numbers had held steady for over a year. She was 9 now, standing a few feet away in a paint-splattered Yankees cap, hands on her hips, bossing Eddie about which shade of blue belonged in the sky. "That's not sky blue," she said, pointing at the marker. "That's pool blue. Use real sky, the one that looks a little tired." Eddie, now 11 and shooting up fast, held up another one. "This one? That's real sky," she said. "Good job, intern." Eddie rolled his eyes but smiled. His adoption hearing was in 6 weeks. He kept asking what tie I'd wear. I told him he could pick it, and now I owned a clip-on with tiny pigeons across it. Of course I did. Catherine jogged up just as they were finishing the outline, red-faced from her loop, ponytail bouncing, red scarf around her neck like always. She waved to the vendor at the corner, handed me a hot coffee without asking how I take it, and kissed my cheek like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Did they draw the bench again?" she asked, sipping her tea. "They draw it every time," I said. "It's their version of a family photo." Her clinic had grown. She had a full intake team now, an actual fund named after a pediatric nurse I never met, and a callback system that returned messages within 24 hours. Families didn't wait seasons anymore, just days, sometimes hours. Clayton told me last week that I looked less haunted on Zoom. Said my face didn't look like a tax audit in progress. I told him that was the nicest thing he'd ever said to me. I was still running my own shop. 3 clients, clean books, no heroics. I worked from a second-hand desk wedged between Eddie's sketch pile and Sophie's math sheets. It was simple. It was mine. Lucy had emailed us a photo the day before, big red adopted stamp across a court form with a smiling kid and tired foster dad. She said she kept those on a pinboard in her office. "Some days the system eats you," she wrote. "Other days it spits out something good." Alice had sent one email last year, 3 lines, no punctuation, a vague apology, and a link to a glossy magazine piece about healing through movement or some polished caption along those lines. I forwarded it to my attorney and went back to packing lunches. Daniela's video still lived on a thumb drive in my top drawer. I didn't watch it often, but when Sophie asked about her mom, I told her the parts I knew were true and the parts I believed were brave. That was enough for her. Cora's old math book sat on our bookshelf like an anchor. When homework got hard, Sophie would tap the cover like it was a secret button and say, "Grandma Cora, help a girl out," before breaking into a grin. I was still me, plain, careful, not built for speeches. But I said no faster now. I drew sharper lines, and I protected the right things. If you're wondering about revenge, it didn't come with fire or applause. It came with documents filed on time, passwords memorized, doors closed gently but firmly. It came with a family that showed up, every single day. Sophie and Eddie held up their latest drawing. It had pigeons in flight, Catherine's red scarf, this bench, and 4 little stick figures in a row. "We forgot your coffee," Eddie said, pointing to my empty hand. Sophie grabbed a gray marker and added a tiny rectangle to the sketch, right in my fingers. "There," she said. "Now it's perfect." I looked at them, the lines they drew, the space we'd built. "It is," I said, and I meant it. "Before you head out, let me throw something at you. When life cornered you the way it cornered Brandon, did you walk away? Or did you fight for the people who mattered? If you've got hype, tap it to help this story reach more folks who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit like. It's a small click that means a lot. Drop a comment too, even a simple good story, or tell me what part hit closest to home. Love you guys.